afternoon, I guess it's early afternoon. My name is Rose Reza, and I am the Executive Director of UNM Taos Hive, the hub of internet-based vocation and education. Co-work, business support, and UNM classes all under one roof. Maritza, welcome, sit down. Thank you. This is, welcome today. This afternoon, we're going to have how a strong brand builds value. And I'm really excited today with our collaboration through UNM Rainforest to be able to bring this program to you all. Thank you for joining us here at the Hive today, and thank you for joining us virtually. Now, what if I look this way? And that's fine. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. We have three great panelists and Seth Gardenswartz is going to be leading the facilitation and discussion. But I want to tell you a little bit about each one of our panelists. So Seth Gardenswartz is a partner at Black Garden Law. Seth is a New Mexican native who grew up with his family in retail. I also was in retail a lot of my career. His legal specialties include trademarks, contracts, payment systems, e-commerce, digital media, and general business management. In addition to practicing law, he's co-developer of a tech flex office building in downtown Albuquerque and co-owner of Surfify.com. And I'm really excited to talk to you about technology because that's one of the big initiatives that we're going to go after is to really develop a tech scalable ecosystem here in Taos, New Mexico, because it can be done, right? We can do anything we put our mind to. The next guest, he doesn't really need an introduction because we all know Brooks Thorson, CIO and co-founder of Taos Bakes. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, Brooks, but Brooks is the Chief Innovation Officer and co-founder of Taos Bakes. He served as a former president of Taos Mountain Energy Bar from 2010 to 2019. 2010 to 2019. That's a long time. Throughout his work with the company, he has strived to create innovation. And you know what's so exciting about Taos Bakes? I have been a fan and follower of you for a long time, but I always say this to Carmen and to all the entrepreneurs I meet, we have such tremendous talent in Taos. And we have a lot of incredible brands that have gone to a national level. International, I don't know if you're there yet, you might be.
Not yet.
But he's a real visionary. So I'm really excited to see and what his team has done, because we always have to give credit to all those individuals that work within the company. And then I have not had the opportunity to meet Madeline Kelty, marketing manager of Taos Ski Valley. Madeline, I know you're joining us virtually. Welcome. She has experience as a marketing professional producer. She currently lives in Taos, New Mexico, working as a marketing manager for Taos Ski Valley. There, she does everything from determining and tracking KPIs, managing email campaigns, and digital media, solidify brand guidelines across customer-facing communications, and produces all the photo and video shots. So we have a really nice panel today. So help me welcome our panelists, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be part of this. I'm a native New Mexican. I'm in love with Taos. We spent as much time up here as possibly can. And actually, I've known Brooks for quite a while. When my wife was the marketing curriculum director for ABQID, then Taos Mountain Energy Bar won the ski lift pitch challenge. Madeline, you weren't part of the. Should unmute so you can just jump right in, right? So
Yep.
Be ready. So and we've spent time together ever since. Branding and marketing is one of my passions. I usually describe myself as a marketing and branding guy who went to law school, not a technician who kind of learned about the other way around. And so one of the really important things to me is always the practical side. The law is really boring until you understand what you're doing, and it might still be boring because you know why you're putting yourself through the brain damage. So we've got two amazing, actual real deal brands in Taos here to illustrate some of the points that we want to talk about today. I'm going to start by just going through a couple high-level slides and talking a little bit about brand at that top level. What is it? Why do we care? What are we trying to talk about here? And then, Brooks and Madeline talking about some real deal stories, some things that have really happened, some value actually being created as part of this brand thing, and what what can go good and what can go not so good. So,
Can you mute your like on your
Yes.
computer?
let's do that.
Okay, now it should work. There we go. Oh no.
Still echoing.
Is your computer muted?
It should be audio off, so. Check,
I don't know.
okay,
All right. I
are we
think-
good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, we can't hear it just yet, but if you'd like to continue.
What's that?
We can't hear her just yet without an echo. but-
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
it's, all right,
But
So-
we're-
so let's throw the slide up, let's throw the,
Can they hear him?
Yeah,
and can we put the slide on the screen, is the slide up on the screen?
you need to share your screen
Yeah.
again.
I did that. All right, check, all right. So first of all, I've got to say this, I'm his attorney, but I'm no one else's attorney in this room, and I'm not sure who all's online here, but you don't have an attorney unless they've signed, well, you certainly don't have me as your attorney unless you sign an engagement agreement. So I want to make that perfectly clear because there's this really great, beautifully handcrafted written disclaimer here. It's the important part of the last, full red thing, which is you're nuts to just listen to someone yammer on for an hour or so and then go, cool, I understand it. This is I wouldn't understand anything that you know how to do really well. I talked to you for an hour, not enough to make a decision, so I'm not your attorney. That's out of the way. So brands. I'm going to start with talking about what's a brand, what is a brand for? What does it do? Then we're going to talk a little bit, Brooke's going to talk about value in a brand, and Matt's going to talk about the good and the bad things that happen, and then we'll talk about the law a little bit. We're going to try to chat starting now for no more than 30 minutes, and then we can really open up to the panel and have some questions. I am happy to hang around afterwards. If anyone has any more questions, online, in person, whatever, I'm in my happy place. So with that, let's get going. What do you need a name for? Why do we have names? So we can touch on, let's. Yeah, to recognize, right, exactly. And so that it's good. So, but what else do we need from a name? Yeah, identification, right? So you've got, so for a business name, you really need, to pay your taxes and to get sued, you just need a number, right? You don't need a name, you just need a precise place to put it in a certain spot. To identify the parties to a contract, when I often ask people for their legal names, I want your legal business name, the whole thing, because I want to put it in the contract, make sure that we're not close. But you need a business name, a brand name, not so you can figure out what kind of business they're in, so you can make sure you're identifying that one business. So if today we had said, we've got some panelists, there's going to be this guy, he's got kind of a ponytail, he's going to wear jeans. It's okay, that's most of us, right? You have not narrowed it down much at all, right? But when you say Brooks, we know that one person, right? So that's what a name really does in a business context. And this idea is not new, right? We've had brands and names for millennia. So these are merchant marks from the Middle Ages, Norwich, England. And interestingly, what is not in any of these?
Letters.
Right.
English letters.
Right. Why? There's no one can read. Most of the customer base didn't have the ability to read words. So these were things they would stamp on their goods, and you would know that, oh, I bought that knife from this guy, it was really good. And then I tried that one and it was not so good. So, or whatever. You know, these were meant to distinguish these merchants and their goods so people would know which one to go back to, which is a marketable.
Do you call these the earliest logos?
Yeah, well, so logo is kind of a graphic. So now we're at a place where we have word marks and graphic marks. And so we also have color marks and sonic marks and many other things. So we're sort of now dividing them up. But in these days, these were marks. And before this, they were actually pressed into clay on, like if you were on the cutting edge of technology about 1,000 years ago, you would have a cylinder that was kind of hard to make that you would engrave your mark in reverse, and you would press it into the pot. And so if someone was counterfeiting it, they could take the cylinder and roll it back over the mark and tell if it was an exact match or not, right? And so that's one other thing that what these marks are for. It's not just so customers can identify you, but you can figure out, it's kind of consumer protection. So the customer doesn't buy the wrong thing, buy something that was a little bit meant to look like this one. So I've cut this slide deck down a lot, and this has 25 slides in it for me to talk about by myself. But there's some other examples that we can talk about briefly. So we're going to get right to books now. So what is a brand in the big picture? So I've already put some answers up on here. The brand is not the name or the logo or the sound or the smell or the color. The brand, from a practical point of view, is the feeling people get when they encounter those things. So the value of that brand is the result of the interaction. And so part of what that means is the first time you see the brand, you really don't have that reaction. It's like, maybe it's like stands out, hopefully. But as you begin to experience the brand and you associate it, that feeling, you associate it with the word or the logo or the color, then those things come together. And that's where the value is really built. And so when we say here, the brand is a gut feeling, or the brand isn't what, as brand owners, as potential brand owners, people say, let me tell you about my brand. Like, no, don't waste your time. Let me tell you, or let your customers tell you how they think about your brand. Or think a little bit about what you want your brand to say, and then don't try to invest it all. Don't try to make the logo carry all that water. The logo just needs to stand out. What does the swoosh mean? Right? It does now, right? 40 years and like $100 billion later. Like it means something. Now they don't need words anymore, right? Because they don't need to. And most of the markets in countries that don't use Latin characters. So that's a couple standard deviations away from where most of us are going to be if we're wildly successful. But the point is, the brand is a feeling, and it's the result really of your consumers' recognition of that uniqueness with the feeling. So, Brooke, why don't you talk a little bit about how brand value has served you and some challenges you have with it?
Absolutely. So I'll be speaking certainly through my own lens. I think it's also important to delineate the difference between a business and a brand. The reason I think that this is very important is because I've personally experienced this when we first launched the business, because at that point it just was a business. The goal was to make $500 a month to cover my rent. That was literally the goal of Thostenson and Madeline Kelty, our former brand. Over the course of the last 12 years, actually this month, it's turned into a brand. So there's, if you talk about the two, I think it's important to sort of define each of them and then take that many steps further. And that's sort of the essence of what Seth and I are getting into. So if you were to Google brand, it would read a type of product or service manufactured by a particular company under a particular name. That's pretty boilerplate, pretty blasé, right? A business, the practice of making one's living by engaging in commerce. Okay, so again, pretty boring, right? But what we're talking about from a branding and from a brand building perspective is the emotional response you get, the psychological response you get, or even the physical response you get from engaging with the brand. It could just be the logo. What does that incite inside of you? It could be dealing with their customer service. It could be eating a product like ours. It could be what sort of service did you get from somebody like Seth, who's a service provider, right? So that's what I want to sort of get at, when we talk about the essence of a brand and of brand building. So, one thing that a way that I look at a brand, and I certainly did not look at it like this when we first started the business, but it is a living, breathing thing. Brands need all the things that we need. They need love, they need money, they need care, they need attention, they need resources. And so when you start to look at what used to be a business, you start to look at it as a brand, it takes on a personality of its own. That personality could be a lot of different things. It could be fun, it could be silly, it could be serious. It could be trustworthy, right? It could be comedic. It could have sex appeal. I mean, that is talking about a brand is very different than talking about a business. I don't know any businesses that are very sexy. Most of the time, businesses are just commodity based, right? Concrete, steel, whatever it is. A lot of people don't really care, what sort of concrete they're walking on, but you very much do care what kind of clothing you wear, right? What kind of shoes you have, what kind of car you drive. So for me, I like to talk about our brand, and I'm also very cognizant of using the word brand. We are a snack brand versus a business, because it does imbue an organization, in our case, with this power that businesses do not have.
Yeah, so I think that's see if I've got this next slide. So this brand is a feeling. We'll talk about that in a second. But this slide, I think, illustrates very well what Brooke is talking about here. So I'm super fortunate to have found a way to move back to New Mexico and have a career that I really love and work with great businesses that I really love. And I can talk to any of you and tell you all about my practice, and you won't remember a thing about it, except for a couple of things that seem to stand out in people's mind. Like when I say I represent about 65% of the beer brewed in New Mexico. That kind of thing people remember, right? Because it's sexy, right? It's fun. So this is one of my clients, the Cumbre Brewing Company. And when I met them, when I first met the company, they were about 6 or 7 years in. They were taking off. They had an unbelievable reputation for quality of products. They had done a lot of things really well. And the owner felt like the thing that he wanted to invest in the most was these shiny steel things, because every dollar he put into one of those shiny steel things, he could take like $1.50 out of the next year, right? It was a way for him to increase production. And that makes a lot of sense from a business point. When you're thinking about it as a business, they're a product, like a snack product. So he's thinking, I sell snacks. My business is valued based on how many snacks I can produce, or beers I can produce, and this is how it is. So when I got to know him, and I wasn't there to talk to him about law, by the way, just stumbled into it literally. He was kind of beginning to realize that the brand value was really what was becoming the container that held all that value that he was creating. So this slide is actually a compressed set of a couple slides to show that all this stuff is important to help build the business, right? The brewery, the tap room, the canning line, all that stuff. But the fact is, and they make all the beer for sure. But if an asteroid came down today and destroyed that brewery, guess what? He could still sell beer. He could contract brew at Sleeping Giant. It would be a Jubilation. It would be at SIDS. It would be a Total Wine. And as long as people walked in and saw elevated IPA, they would still buy it. And to think about it another way, if Sierra Nevada or New Belgium showed up and said, God, we gotta have this brand, we gotta have this brewery, what would they be buying? That they don't already have?
Trademark.
Sure, absolutely. That trademark portfolio would be super valuable in terms of securing that transaction. But why would they want those trademarks?
That's how other people feel.
Because exactly right, because that they have owned the headspace for the consumers in the market. And when they walk into the restaurant or the liquor store, they say, I'll have a slice of heaven. I'll have an elevated IPA. And creating that takes
Years.
and
Lots of money,
and
lots of time. I don't know.
well, yeah,
Stress, I don't know.
all the lawyers, like, a lot of people stuff, right? Yeah,
Can I ask a question?
of course.
What if you are a brand or are becoming a brand and then your business is coming after? Like I have my Instagram following, so
Right.
I'm a brand.
Right,
But I also have my Loteria Paleteria, which is a business,
right.
which are two different type things. How do you start to integrate your brand, your business into your brand? Does that make sense?
So I would say you don't have a brand, you have an audience,
An audience.
right? It's not a brand, like that's, you have an audience. And that's very, very helpful in terms of, you think about right now, there are accelerators right now to help celebrities build cosmetic brands, right? And so why do those things go together? Because celebrities already have an audience. Like when you built Taos Bakes, formerly Taos Energy Bar, you didn't have either of those things, right? You didn't have a brand, you didn't have a product, you didn't have an audience. So you had to create, buy, produce those things, right? You had to, and audiences you typically have to buy either with sweat and or cash, right? So posting on Instagram, for example, will get you an audience to a certain point as a business, and then you're probably gonna have to do some kind of paid promotion. You'll have to engage other influencers or do targeted digital marketing, right? So you'll have to do one of those things. But that audience could be for many things, or it could be only for one thing. Do you ever, my wife and I have the same phone, they're different colors, but occasionally we'll reach for the wrong one. And usually it's just look at someone else's Twitter feed, right? And so, and Kat and I have been married for almost 30 years. We're pretty close. Our Twitter feeds are massively different. Like we just follow different people, and those are different audiences, right? Or different reflections of audiences.
So I have sort of a different take on it. I do think that you actually do have a brand. I'll refute Seth over here. I think that the key is just simply aligning your own personal brand with the business's brand, right? From an ideal, from an ethics, from a quality standpoint. I mean, what is your brand about?
New Mexico. I'm Taos Wildflower. I started it actually during the pandemic because I started to promote local businesses in Taos because they're all my neighbors, and so I started out, it's gonna be 2 years in July. I hit 10K plus followers, but then during last season, I started Loteria Paleteria. And so I give more love to my Taos Wildflower because it's hard to manage. It's a daily thing to try to manage both, but I do have an Instagram, but I tend to still intertwine my paleta making, I do it in an inspirational way, for local businesses, like showing how we're doing and then putting inspirational messages. So I didn't know if I should just continue to do what I have because I have that audience on this one versus creating a new one. Because it's
Right, and I would say yes. What I would do is I would make two lists, a list of your own personal brand, what's important to you, and what's your personal brand essence. That's a term that we use a lot in our company. And then write down what is your business's brand essence and start working on seeing whether those coincide. And if they don't, then I would start to figure out what you want your business to stand for. And if they do, then you're leaps and bounds ahead of them.
You can keep them separate. For example, you could have a separate audience or separate personal, that's a good way to put it, personal brand. Like I have a personal, I have personal social media assets and I have professional social media assets. They cross over a lot, but they're not identical. Like, there are things that are separated. And I think that if you totally integrated them, you would make that so that, let's just say your Instagram audience, part of the marketing engine for your brand, total alignment, you have given up everything else, or you have emphasized, that audience, the benefit of your company. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, it's just I do collaborations on my IG, so I do make, minimal amount, it's nothing big, it's more to just help promote other businesses.
Sure.
So, yeah, so I that's the question, should I just treat them differently, two different businesses, because I'm getting income two different ways, if that makes sense.
So, sure, so let's go through the overview and then we'll go deep into the.
No, I was just waving.
Okay, so I'm trying to remember what, all right, so in terms of the distinctiveness side of building a brand, remember we talked a little bit about the first time you encounter a brand doesn't have the feeling because you haven't invested in the feeling, but you do want it to stand out, right? You do want it to be distinctive in that, as opposed to Brooks relative to the guy with the ponytail and Taos, right? Guy with the ponytail and Taos, not distinctive, not helpful. That's, Brooks, helpful, distinctive, right? So this is this little graph that we show that shows these words, these marks down here on the lower left, these are weak. And there's only so strong they can ever get because they are so highly descriptive of the goods and services that you're producing. The more descriptive you are, the weaker your mark is. Or the other way to say it is, the harder it is to get your mark to function as a distinguishing characteristic, right? If you go up these charts on the right, Kodak is a made up word, it's not a word. It was never a word, they made it up. And then they made it mean what it meant. And you can sort of see the whole life cycle because now it means a company that didn't figure out how to make the transition between technologies, right? But and these are sort of in the middle here. I think from a instructive point of view, you want to keep, when you're starting a business, nobody knows you. You want to get going, you want people to know you and know what you do. So people get very attracted to these descriptive elements for their brand. Here's what we usually tell people. Use them, but add something descriptive or distinctive to that. So if it's going to be a beer, don't call it lager, call it Bosque lager, right? You still have the descriptor in there so people know what it is. But notice that Nike dropped all their descriptors as they got better and better known. It used to be Blue Ribbon Sports, the packaging used to have, even when they started with the stylized 4 letters, they had all kinds of other stuff underneath it, text underneath it to tell you a little bit about the brand, because they were nothing. They were making shoes offshore to compete against Adidas. But over time, they got to drop those things, and now they don't even work from the letters anymore, right? So, but that's a good example, or at least it's helpful to visualize where you're going with it. When you talk about when people are talking about, Taos Mesa Brewing or Bosque Brewing or La Cumbre Brewing, they don't say, did you go to Taos Mesa Brewing or La Cumbre Brewing? They say, did you go to Taos Mesa or La Cumbre? Because of course you're talking about beer. You don't need to add those other pieces in there. All right, so this is important. I think it's important in part because you want people to recognize you, and you want to keep, to some degree, if you own that distinctiveness, you're able to keep control of the brand. And keep in mind that those distinctive things can be anything. They can be can't hear the sound, I turned it off, but you can't hear that dun, 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 like that is a sonic brand. The HBO, the Netflix, those are sonic brands. So you know, you could be in the other room, you know that someone turned on Netflix because you recognize that sound, right? It can be a shape, that very, very famous, it's called design patent, but the shape of the bottle or trade dress, it is non-functional, you know, so it identifies that product. And it can be a color, right? So that, exactly, right? They see, it works. The other example is Tiffany, that turquoise color in the box, right? Non-functional, so it describes the brand. So you want to own those. And if you don't own them, it can be difficult. So again, this is another example of a sort of old school trademark, an artist signing their mark. I am not deeply schooled in San Ildefonso pottery, but I know that it's got that name on it. It's special, right? Like, and to a degree, brands give that difference to products, right? Because when a brand becomes well known, you know that it's got that brand on it. It's special. This would be like obviously a very, very special, but for a New Mexico audience, it's a good example, I think. So before we go into the law, let's get in terms of this protection piece, Madeline, what happens when you don't really give a firm control of your brand?
So Seth and I talked about this recently. One thing, so I'm from Taos Ski Valley, the ski resort. As everyone here knows, there is the village of Taos Ski Valley and the town of Taos. And so as you come around here, you will notice that as new technologies develop after the brand, you'll notice that people weren't on top of protecting brand names or consistency across all those platforms. So with Taos Ski Valley, we end up with Ski Taos on Instagram, Taos Ski Valley on Facebook, Taos Ski Valley on Twitter, which is we're losing. And then the town of Taos has Visit Taos because someone else took Taos. And the chamber for the village of Taos Ski Valley has the Taos Ski Valley Instagram handle. So when Seth and Brooks and I were talking, I was just talking about diluting the brand and the confusion that can come with that if you are not very on top of all new technology, all new platforms, and all new places where customers can interact with your brand.
And I think
Seth, you guys muted, so I can't hear you, just so you know.
they're not going to get exclusive use of that. Think, for example, about purgatory, right? So purgatory, very different situation. They came up with this plucky name in the 60s, right, 70s. And then they tried to change it, actually, to Durango Mountain Resorts, which I was at.
Sorry, there's a question in the chat. How about QR codes as a trademark?
We'll get to that
Okay.
in a second. But the point is, two interesting things. One is they tried to change it. It was a bad idea, in my personal opinion, which is usually correct in things like this. But it didn't work because the consumers already had come to know that area as purgatory. And so they had actually successfully carved out that brand identity or that brand recognition. And the fact is, they tried to change it. They didn't really want to change the name. They just wanted to change what it meant. And it's much, much harder to get people to recognize a name. That's hard. That takes time, money, you can tweak it, you can modify it a little bit, but to totally change it, you're going to cut off all that recognition. And if you think about where your sales come from, 2/3 of your sales come from your best customers, right? The people who shop with you all the time. but a third, 20, 15% of your sales come from people who shop with you once in a while. Well, could you live without that 15%? That's usually where the profitability starts, right? So you need that, you need those sales, and those come from these people who are not your, maybe they're gonna be your good customers, but they're like, oh yeah, I've heard, maybe I'll try that, gee, I've had that bar, but now they're selling granola, maybe I'll try that. You want that. Don't cut that off unless you have to. So.
Yeah, and
Madeline, do you
one
wanna-
thing,
Sorry, we'll turn you back up.
Okay,
just one thing that I would say is anyone who's starting a brand, starting a company, even if you aren't immediately going to utilize that platform, if you are selling direct to customer and you don't want a website right now, get the domain, get all of the handles on Facebook, on TikTok, because you might not want TikTok right now, but 5 years down the road, it might still be something that you can invest in. So get anything and everything that you can. We don't have an Instagram handle for our airline. If people don't know, we own and operate Taos Air. Through a giant oversight, no one ever grabbed that. So recently I picked up Fly Taos Air. We're not doing anything with it, but at least no one else can take it right now. But yeah, there are just those things that you want to take care of now so that you don't have that headache later. You're not trying to pay someone off for a handle, a domain, whatever that is. Because a lot of that stuff is free now and it's worth it. And so invest in your brand from the beginning.
The Taos brand.
Mhm.
ask your question again.
What's the question?
Oh, what else have you done to protect what else does Taos do to protect its brand?
Oh, we have trademarks and stuff like that, and partnerships, and we're trying. I am new to leading the marketing team here, and I will say some people have been lax with our logo and stuff like that, but trying to get stricter control. Like I said, trademarks are in place. We'll go after people for use if it is not authorized, and working towards that. Really getting consistency and alignment across all of our brands.
Off for a second, and then we'll go to questions, right? Because we said trademarks and we said protection and so forth. So let's talk about the law. So the Trademark Act, first of all, trademarks are intellectual property. So the P in IP, of course, means property, but what do you think of when you think of property? What does property mean?
Something physical.
Something you own.
Right. So it's usually something physical and tangible. Historically, that's what we call real property. If you suffer through law school,
Something you own.
right? Well, let's get there in a second, right? So, so if it's not real property, we call it personal property or intellectual property. So if it's intellectual property, then we know it's not physical anymore. So you said something that you own. So what does that mean?
It's you. It's things that you created.
You have the right to
on
use
a
it.
virtual.
You have the right to use it. Absolutely.
Right to exclude.
Yes.
The right to
That
monetize.
is the critical, that is the critical differentiator.
No trespass.
If
For
you
those
don't,
that are, repeat what he said, for those that are on the.
he said you have the right to exclude. No one really has a property right of any degree unless they have some right to exclude. It doesn't have to be a unlimited right. In fact, none of us have an unlimited right to exclude. If you own a home, for example, you have some right to exclude, but it's not, but the police can come in if they have a warrant. The fire department can come in if they see an emergency. You can, they tore up a strip in my front yard because the gas company has an easement, right? So they can repair the utilities. But I do have quite a bit of leeway to exclude use of my property, to exclude people being on my lawn if I don't want to be, certainly being in the house, we have a lot of rights around those things. So property means a right to exclude. And so we also said right to use. New businesses often say, can I use this name? Or can I use this logo? That's important. Mature businesses say, can I stop someone else from using this name or using this logo? Looking at Madeline, I'm looking at Madeline on the screen. Because if you can stop someone else from using the logo, the name, that's because when your reputation starts to take off, if you've got brand equity, it's easier for you to market, it's easier for you to get into new places, your marketing dollar goes further because people recognize it a little bit more. And so if people start to free ride on your brand, that's not so bueno. Like that they're kind of cheating, essentially. Or they're diluting.
I've got a personal actual story. So we started our Amazon business sort of, I think, late in the game. Most of our focus was on brick and mortar sales, and we went through a rebrand from Taos Mountain Energy Bars to Taos Bakes. Well, since we did this, another company decided to take Taos Bakes as the name within Amazon. So if you Google, or if you are on Amazon and you look up Taos Bakes, it's actually not us. We've since had to make our brand T, like the letter T, Taos Bakes. So we've been fighting it out ever since. We're still trying to get our brand registry cleared up and actually get that name back, just to give you guys some understanding. And we're constantly removing third-party sellers that are not authorized to sell the product. We're the only, we should be the only seller on Amazon, but they're taking our products and so just sort of talking about what, Farley and off what Madeline was saying about protection, it's extremely important because you might be buying from somebody who's selling a product that's extremely old, right, or outdated. And a lot of the times, the cost is off, it's much more expensive. There was actually even a seller on Amazon posing as us that we're selling one bar for the same cost as we were selling it for a box. Wow. So we got some negative reviews because people thought it was us. And they're spending almost $30 for an individual bar.
That's almost a perfect example of what we would call dilution, right? They're not trying to free ride on your brand, but they're hurting your brand by representing themselves as your brand. The consumers don't know. Like the brand worked in a sense, but someone else is free riding off it. They're not an authorized dealer. They're hurting that brand as the living entity. The sum total of all the experiences people have, positive and negative, there's a negative. So PA property, right to exclude, you want the right to stop them. There's two founders of our firm. One of us is a corporate attorney by training, the other one is an IT attorney by training. We cross over a lot, but when it comes to that P part, most people who approach us to start businesses, oftentimes they don't think about how to protect some of their intellectual property until they need to get on an Amazon store.
It's too late.
Right? Yeah. And then it's really, and then what would have been something to do is a much higher bar to do. Registered trademarks allow you to.
I'm sure you're going to go into this, but there is a question. So how do you protect your name and logo? Where do you go to register?
Okay, we'll definitely talk about that. So one of the things to point out, and I'm sure Madeline's experienced this too, if you have a registered trademark, your ability to turn off social media accounts that are clearly infringing on your brand is so much easier. Like it's a couple hours of work as opposed to weeks or months with a very uncertain kind of result. If you've got a registered trademark, they don't want to mess around with it. And that's why the Amazon brand registry, to have a branded storefront, they require a US federally registered trademark on the primary register. Okay, so Madeline, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I was just going to say it is a little tricky where we come from because, as you were saying, if I establish a brand and a name, then anyone coming after me, and we are fully aware that the town of Taos originated way before the ski valley, you know, and the village of Taos Ski Valley after. And so we're not the only ones, you know, you've got Vail Resort and the town of Vail, you've got Breckenridge Resort and the town of Breckenridge. And so I think it's just coming to a mutual understanding with, you know, the village, the chamber, all of those about the branding and how you are presenting those names or those accounts to the public in order to not confuse them.
I might be doing that in a sense, like my business is called Loteria Paleteria. And the reason I chose Loteria is because it is a Mexican game we grew up playing. And so there's several things that are Loteria, but I chose Loteria Paleteria because it's something that I did with my grandmother. You know what I mean? And a paleteria is what I do. So I don't know if I'm doing that tricky kind of thing. And then I'm Taos Wildflower. I took Taos like Taos Faith. Taos is a very famous word
Right.
that it triggers.
It is a brand.
It's a brand. So I didn't know, am I in that kind of?
So one of the things to understand is, if we're getting to question about registration and so forth, is you don't own the word. So you know, Taos Ski Valley doesn't even own the word Taos Ski Valley as a composite brand. It owns the right to use them to identify a ski area and the associated services. So Delta, dental, faucets, and airlines are all registered trademarks,
I see.
right?
Okay.
And federally registered trademarks, and old brands and big companies with lots of money and lots of lawyers and all kinds of stuff there. So how does this happen? Well, you don't stumble into Lowe's and go, oh, cool, the airline's making toilets now. Like, you know, like these are really, really different things. And even so, the lines are not crystal clear. They're not what we call bright lines in the legal field. Because
Apple computer and
Yes.
Apple Music.
dude, that's the penultimate example, right? A federal judge ruled that Apple Computer was not infringing on Apple Music in, I think it was 1978 or something like, you know, early 80s, late 70s. And the reason he ruled that is like, these guys are in the computer business and those guys are in the music business. They are super different. Never come together.
And Claude Shannon.
Yeah, they were, sometimes they get it wrong. But so the point is, those words don't have to do directly. If those words are descriptive of your business, they're geographically descriptive. When we did Brooks trademark work, or you know, Taos Base, Taos Mountain Energy trademark work, look, Taos is descriptive if you're in Taos, and so you can overcome that, but you got to take time, work, etc., to show that it's now means something other than stuff that came from Taos, right? So, and American Airlines and Taos Ski Valley, you know what? It ain't so hard to start a ski area. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time. So there aren't that many of them. And so it's a little easier but you got to prove that this is now a distinguished mark, and that, you know, people go to ski areas also not just from within 10 or 20 miles, they come from thousands of miles away, you know, so that's helpful for those things. But for most new businesses, what we usually say is, don't start, you're starting off, like no one knows your brand, not a single soul. Pick something that you can build on. Like let's start, it's trust me, it's harder than it sounds, but let's not start with something that's going to be problematic down the road. Let's do a little bit more work up front and find something that we can really own and control. And that includes, can we get the social media handles? Can we get the domains? Can we get things like that? Creativity is harder than it sounds, but it helps to do it right.
Yeah, I would also encourage you to think through the life process of the brand when you're naming it. You know, right now you might be a very small brand, or just a business, or it might just be a thought at this point, but there can be repercussions. I mean, one of the outcomes that we never thought about when we named our brand was we have a very hard time selling into any other ski resorts, and there's a huge volume there because we're Taos. right? Everybody knows Towski Valley, and just simply by association, we basically have had to abandon that entire channel simply because they don't want to, represent what they perceive as a competitor.
Competitor, how interesting.
No, that's fascinating. Okay, so a couple of questions that have come in through the chat, and then we can keep going with questions. So one of the questions we got is, how do you protect your brand, right? I probably have slides in here that I probably skipped. This one's good. I'll leave it up here as a background. But we do, so many lawyers who do trademark work get a lot, maybe most of their clients who come in because they have a problem, right? So they're like, oh, I started this business a year, 10 years ago, a month ago, whatever, and I got this cease and desist letter, or I found this other brand who's or something like that, or I can't get this, someone's got this Instagram handle or something like that, and then they come into the fold. I deleted all these slides, but I thought we weren't going to have time to do it. But our more mature clients, and I don't mean like they're emotionally mature, but they've been around the block a few times. Particularly if they have lots of brands, if consumer products companies, we do clearance for them. So, for example, the slides I deleted were Lacumbre launched a new product 2 summers ago, and they knew they had a spot in their lineup for this new product. They worked on the recipe for a year. They tested it under different names. They knew it was going to go. So we did a ton of background research and had like these, and suddenly it's like we're part of the company. Like we're like, no, I don't like that name. We go through all this stuff, and the fact is, we ultimately picked a name that meant nothing to anybody. No one really loved it. No one really hated it, and I was very confident that my big impact was like, I think we can get this brand registered, like federally registered, like on the first go round. Took a lot of time. But sure enough, we had notice of approval before they even dropped the beer. And I went to the opening day that year, took a picture of my receipt, filed the paperwork, and then we got a registration number, right? So we can keep them off Instagram, keep them off Twitter, we can do all that stuff. We can do it really well. So clearance is a big part of protecting your brand before you think, understanding what else, why are things registered, and there's all kinds of things. Phonic equivalent or phonetic equivalent. Does it sound the same even if it looks different? Is it geographically descriptive, like Taos? Is it primarily commonly a surname, right? Because they won't give most people a exclusive right to use a word that is many people's last name.
McDonald's.
Right, yeah, well, you can get there. You just can't, it was easier 50 years ago, 8 years ago. But my last name, pretty easy, because everybody's got my last name as a blood relative. But if you have a more common last name, then it can be anything. Foreign language equivalents, if the language is commonly spoken in the United States. So that means French, that means Chinese, that means, those are things you have to watch out. So if you just say, oh, it's cocina, and the word is kitchen, it's like, no, it means they're gonna look at it as if it's kitchen. So registration is important. Is registration the only way? No. Is it the most expensive way? It's registration is not the cheap way to go, but the cheap way to go is do nothing and see if something happens. But if something happens, I would say the average small business has to change their name because of, first of all, litigation, $10,000 to $50,000 to lose quickly, right? And then I was doing analysis for a party last week. Change the channel cut sign on the front of their building. Change all the media. Change all the packaging. 3 months to sell down the inventory or destroy it. Like, I don't know. It cost you some money.
It took us 2 years to rebrand. We started in 2017 and launched in June of 2018. Just to give you guys some understanding.
Logos and everything.
Yeah. So avoid that. So there were some other chat questions.
So it was Where do you go to register your trademark? Like, where can you go?
So you can register state trademarks if you're only planning to use the mark in New Mexico. You can register it at the New Mexico Secretary of State's office. It's actually, it's going to shock you, but it's not all that tech friendly. It's a paper form. You have to download it, fill it out, put the stamp. Requires this is my least favorite term, wet signature. And then you mail it back to Santa Fe, and they process it. And I will say the people who work there are fantastic. There's just not enough of them. They don't have enough funding. You know, they're just, this is the same department that runs the elections, processes business formations. Like, you know, it's they're not lawyers. They're, you know, they don't have any of the training that they ideally would have. So you can do that in that case. This is a little bit of a deeper cut. A state trademark has got in some ways more value than I think they had, or I thought they had when I started practicing law. But a federal trademark wins every time, and use always wins over registration, which sounds counterintuitive, but you get trademark rights from use, not from registration. Registration gives you, vastly expands what would otherwise you'd have to prove as use. So, and here's the real world example. Dee's Cheesecake Factory in Albuquerque. Anybody know where Dee's Cheesecake Factory in Albuquerque?
Yeah.
Right. So they opened for business 1 year or a couple of years after the Cheesecake Factory opened in Beverly Hills.
Oh,
In California.
oh, cheesecake.
Dutch Cheesecake Factory, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yes, but thank you for, yeah. So they opened around the same time, but what really happened is, I think let's just say that Dee's Cheesecake Factory opened first. The Cheesecake Factory opened second in Beverly Hills, operated for a year or two, then filed a federal trademark registration. Okay, so here's what that did. That made their use not just Beverly Hills anymore, but everywhere else in the United States and the territories, right? By operation of law, which means it didn't happen, but we're going to treat it like it did. So they get use everywhere else. However, they don't get to overwrite someone else's actual use. It's as if people who used it anywhere in between have a little island, and the federal trademark registration just filled in the gaps. So of course, no one knew that in Albuquerque until 30, 40 years later, when the Cheesecake Factory, now a franchise and everything else, wants to come to Albuquerque, and little local Cheesecake Factory says, hey, wait, we've been using it here. And they fought it out and they won. So they kept, that's why the Cheesecake Factory, it took them 7 or 8 years to open. They had to wait out the owners until they retired. It could happen the other way around too. There was a company, there's a bakery that opened in Albuquerque. These are just local examples in Hoffmantown called Doughboy. Doughboy was his nickname, and you know, wherever. And apparently, story ever, and I don't know if it's true, is that someone walked into the General Mills plant and said, right on the sale, and said, hey, you guys are opening a retail store here in town, isn't that cool? And they were like, what? They called headquarters, cease and desist letter, and the owner was just, don't ever do this. He said, they can't do that. That's a 50-year-old brand. And the other thing you hear is like, they're big, we're small, why are you picking on us? Like, that's a public company with shareholders. They have a fiduciary duty. That brand, by the way, is the most valuable asset of the company. Like everything else, they can rent, sell, like you know, they happen to own a lot of their plants. They don't have to. So you don't want to, if you're gonna get close to the infringement game, don't do it with a big consumer products company, because they don't have a choice. Decades and decades ago, I was a Nike dealer. Do not put their logo on something without their permission. doesn't matter how much they love you. They'll love you a lot less until you work that out. Because that's their brand. That's their, like, how would you feel? Madeline, how do you feel if someone else put the Towski Valley logo on an anorak?
Yeah, it wouldn't go over well with us. And in fact, we had an unauthorized use of our logo, or an employee at Taos authorized the use of our logo without running it by the people in power. And it ended up somewhere that it shouldn't have. And then that company came back and said, hey, we want to make a bunch more of these. And I had to break the news that they weren't allowed to use that logo, and the employee that gave them permission did not actually have the permission to do so. But it's something that could have gotten us in a lot of trouble with our current partners or other partnerships that we were pursuing. So it still happens, even within the company. But that's why it's really important.
Give them the opportunity to buy a license, or you just said no?
This was not an opportunity to buy a license. It was a partnership deal, where an employee, like I said, went in and said, sure, we'll be your partner and we'll do this. And then when they came back to print another round, said employee was no longer here. And it was the first time that a lot of us were hearing of this partnership. And so it got squashed pretty quickly. So not something that they could license, because like I said, we already had conflicting partnerships with other brands. So it could have gotten us in a lot of trouble.
Colorful trademark stories. Let me cover a couple of the questions here on the chat. So I'm looking at the chat, but I want to look at the camera here. So someone asked about QR codes as a trademark. Short answer or long answer? Short answer, no. And not because it's not possible. I just think it's a terrible idea. Like, you know, I can't tell one QR code from the other one until I scan it. So there are companies that make QR codes that are embedded into a graphic. So I think you're better off putting your QR code behind your logo, because your logo is kind of the, I often describe, one of the mistakes people make a lot is they go form an LLC, they form a C Corp at the Secretary of State's office. They're like, wait, I own the name right. I'm good, I got the name registered. Like, no, you did not. You got the name registered with the Secretary of State, so if someone wants to sue you, they know where to send the paperwork. So that is like an IP address. Your brand is more like your URL. And so I would say from a QR code, when I say, oh my God, I had the most amazing bar. It was like a dark chocolate and sea salt. And they said, what kind of bar was it? I don't draw them a picture, right? I don't say, what was kind of this light shade of pink? You know, I say a name. And until your brand hits a certain tipping point of recognition, that's probably going to be the most valuable way for that to. And by the way, even if I text someone, the odds I misspell it, me personally, 100%. Most people, 50%. So you want something that has that consistency and redundancy, so when people know what you're going for. There are a lot of stories about people who have brand names so close to their competitors, like DMVs, ubiquitously across the world. They all name themselves in a way, they're all the acronym for whatever the motor vehicle department is in their state, and some synonym for fast. Every single one of them. So I've been with Janice Lucero, who owns Big Green Sign, which she registered trademark, and her, God, I can't remember the name because it's. But I've been with her when people say, "Oh, I've used your place." She's like, "Which one?" And they give the address of one of her competitors because they can't tell the difference between names. So don't do that either. So that's my input on QR. QR codes can be a good part of your branding strategy or your marketing strategy, but it's probably not a trademark itself. Other questions?
I think those were all the questions we had on the chat.
Okay.
So how do you differentiate, or what do you do, like in this case, and that would probably be similar, I don't have an audience though, but like when you have your own name that you're using and putting out there versus something else that has more of a business? Do you trademark both? Or,
So my input is usually, it's hard enough for people to remember one name. The brand for the business should be one name. And by the way, you might have a couple different logo treatments, but just use the same logo. Nike has one logo. So for example, so you don't need, more logos are just confusing. And as Madeline pointed out, brand standards are really helpful in terms of consistency. So people kind of know, it's almost like when you're watching TV, you can kind of tell whose commercial it is before they show you the logo. Because there's some other brand elements and consistencies that they've used, so you can kind of see what it's going to be. So if you're consistent, it's going to make your marketing dollar go a lot further. Because you don't want to overspend to educate. It's like, oh, I really love this logo too, let's use it. Or if you do this, just know you're signing up for essentially your own art project. It's not really classic brand marketing. If you've got a fortune to spend and lots of different customer segments, yeah, it makes sense to have different, you might have different faces for different customer groups. But for most of us, I would recommend it.
Yeah, consistency is very important. The only thing that we do is we have different orientations, right? The Taos-based logo with the face, text beneath it, text to the side of it, text above it, whatever, just so you can use it on in different formats. But it's all consistent, same color, same dimensions.
If you get on Canva, for example, it'll show you all the formats for Instagram, for Facebook, portrait, square, because you'll need those things for social media. And you want to make sure that when you put your logo in, it doesn't look stuffed in, expanded, twisted. You want it to be, you need those treatments, but they're consistent.
yeah, this might be more of a private conversation, but like I have an umbrella and then very differentiated programs that have different stages of being in a family that support them. So one's for pregnant couples and other one's for individuals at any age. And so it's like, could just go with the umbrella logo, which I don't have that, or, cutesy ones for the family fun course or something. So
I mean, I would structure it sort of like we do, right? I mean, each flavor has its own face, personality, right?
Yeah.
So people know what they're getting, but it's all part of the
under one umbrella.
overarching house space logo.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
What else? Anybody?
How do you transition it from product to service based? Like I do service, not product. So how can I take that brand of my service? Like, oh, they're using my name, but it's a product. I'm a service.
So yes, I think you asked a couple questions there together. It's like, how do you brand a product or a service? You definitely brand services. All restaurants are service marks because they don't really make
I
food.
think UPS, FedEx, those are
Right.
services,
Right.
huge brands too.
Yeah, very, 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 very big brands. Our law firm's a service brand. We're professional services, and we every interaction, like I make a point of not dressing up for stuff like this because all lawyers dress up. I don't. It's a way for us to stand out. Your question about whether a product could infringe on your service brand, it can. We call those coordinated classes. And so, for example, the restaurant class is a service class, but food as a product class could interfere. For example, we do trademark work for Dion's. So when we started working with them, they only had service class marks. And I was like, well, gee, wouldn't it kind of be a drag if Dion's frozen pizza showed up at Smith's someday, or Kroger, and so we got that brand registered for them, but they have to actually do it. They have to produce products, right? So in order to do that. So fortunately, they are selling products they sell packaged products over the counter at the store. Now, you look at like El Pinto, they're full on of the grocery. It's like they're selling products, all the time. But you can do that. The question to me is always the law, the top level law is like, is there a likelihood of confusion? Is it like Delta and the toilets and the dental plans? Or is it like, beer and bar services where they're the same channels of trade? That's the question.
I wanted to ask about branding with Taos. And some people steal it, like Taos footwear, and some people earn it, like Taos bakes. And is there a way to approach the patent office and say, these people don't earn it? Can we take away Taos footwear's use of Taos, because they're in Malibu and they make their shoes in China. They don't even have a designer here.
Unfortunately, we again don't own the name Taos, as I've stated, and that's something we can't control. I know that Volkswagen, before they named the car Taos, did approach the town and talked to the town government, and I believe got permission from them. There were also discussions with our leadership before that naming went into place. So I think there are some companies that approach it differently and understand the value or sentimental value, of a name like that, and especially of Taos and its history. But there's not much you can do, as Seth said, when it's a geographic location.
Right. And so none of us have the right to exclude because of that. And so, and the fact, honestly, is if any of us here in this room are using Taos as part of our brand, at least one of us is, then we have a little bit weaker right to exclude someone, because anybody can use it as a descriptor, like it's in your address. It's an ingredient in a sense in the experience. So it's not a terribly distinct. If you're not in Taos and you're using it, it actually works pretty well. It does distinguish you in terms of now. Here's the edges of that. If it's geographically misdescriptive, and that what an album might be. In other words, if consumers buy it believing that they're getting a Taos product, then you can take action against them. One of the things that people don't really understand is there's no trademark police. If you break into your house, you can call the police. If people are infringing on your trademark, you have to do something about it. You've got to write some letters, file some lawsuits, do something about that. However, there is something that could be done, and this is something that I've always wanted someone to work on. Is like Hatch chilies. It's a good example, right? So people make Hatch chilies all over the world because
Hatch is famous.
It's famous, right? So it's got what we call secondary meaning. You could file what's called a certification mark, and what that means is only people who meet the criteria can use the mark, like made in the USA is a certification mark. Made in Taos, made in Hatch, or Hatch made, that could be a cert mark. People could still use, obviously anybody who's in Hatch will be able to use Hatch as part of their name.
Right.
But
you'd exclude people who are not.
Right.
So if Taos were to do a certification, they could exclude.
They couldn't just immediately exclude anybody else. First of all, people who've used it before, you're not going to go back and wipe out anything else.
Right.
Cert marks work well when you work to promote their meaning for people. So Better Homes and Gardens seal of approval is a certification mark. Anyone guess what you got to do to qualify for that? Yes, full credit, but guess what else they ask? There has to be some criteria. It's not just pay. You gotta have some criteria. And the criteria there is you have to have a written return policy. Doesn't have to be a particularly, friendly one. You just gotta have a written policy, right? So that's the standard. And we've done cert marks for actually CNM for somebody who's completed a certain certification, certain accreditation that they've finished the course. So they can say they're a certified whatever. CFP, Certified Financial Planner, is a very valuable mark that that organization spent a god-awful fortune promoting because their target was boomers. They had to use traditional media to get to them. It was expensive. But they made that mark mean something. So people who have that mark can charge more, easier to get clients, like all those things work.
They have to pass the test.
Right, a hard test, right. Exactly, and it's legit, like it's a real thing. I don't have to have a cert mark just to call myself a lawyer, but I kind of get that same effect, right? Because
Being a member of the bar.
Right. Exactly.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about a new business making decisions about how many of these things they can do DIY and research themselves and file themselves versus when, how to make decisions about investing in professional advice and support, which is obviously ideal, but when you're in that phase, when you have all time and no money, do you have any tips?
The answer to this and all your legal questions are the following. It depends. So I think that part of it is it depends upon how knowledgeable and experienced you are, because there's usually some things that you either have a little bit more affinity or a friend or something that can help you along the way, and some that you don't. And the other thing I always want to analyze is what are the consequences of screwing this up? Like how easily could I fix this? Is it hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars? Like what's the differentiation there? I think in terms of your here's my business, right? Clearance process.
Are we gonna get a copy of that?
Yeah,
That'd be great.
absolutely. So the name of your business is fundamental. You don't want to change it. Like it's going to really hurt to change it. Particularly if you've been in business for a month or a year, less so. But if you've been around for a while, you got to change it. It's gonna hurt a lot. You lose all that secondary meaning, all that acquired certificates. As you go up a little ways, products. Again, I told you about the product that we really pre-cleared. A lot of times they don't do that. They just they'll throw it out there. If it really takes off, they'll come back and call us, and we'll do an analysis. Maybe change the name early on before it becomes a big problem. I would say, and the other thing to think about too is what's the scope of your business. DIY, you can definitely move the needle DIY, but here's what I would tell you: if you're going to do DIY clearance, if you do your own search and you don't find any problems, you need some help. If you find the answer you're looking for, you need some help. If you find some issues, some gray, some concerns, we never say green light, full speed ahead, no worries, ever. Because it's never the case, and that's kind of bad advice. That's like very minimal issue, very minimal concern. If there was a concern, this is what it would be. This is how likely it would be. This is how that would be. Things like that. Or do you have any?
For us, when we first launched, every single dollar went right back into the business. So we did a lot of what we could to start, and then we reached a point where we just weighed our risk versus sort of return, and said, well, we can't really afford at this point to continue on unless we take on somebody like Seth, and that's ultimately how we started working with him. So yeah, I think that, again, like this is not legal advice by any means, but you're the small business owner. I mean, you have a risk tolerance, and how risky is it? And then what do you stand to lose? You know, and it doesn't hurt to just talk to people and get quotes and pull the trigger whenever it makes sense.
You should be able to find people that will talk to you. And I would say that's true of any not just lawyers, but accountants and marketing people and you know, certainly, you know, professionals. You want to find someone that you're comfortable with and that you can talk to. And part of that is feeling comfortable that and how they're going to bill you and what kind of advice are they going to give you. You know, I would say if you're going to DIY, if you're committed to DIYing it, like, go back to this presentation and pick that super distinctive, unusual, made up name. And because then you can actually really look hard for something that's anywhere close to it. And then you can feel you're more likely not to bump into something else if you're doing that. However, true story, I tried to register for somebody Chamisa as a brand. I thought it was cool. I liked it. I thought it was a good name. We got cited for chemise. Different product, but in the close enough to be confusing. And so me, born and raised in Albuquerque, lived in some other places. I'm on the phone with the examiner in Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm like, Chamisa and chemise, like these are like it's one letter off. And so sure enough, if you look at it objectively, it's like, yeah, these words look very similar. And they do have a common Latin root if you went down that rabbit hole. So that can happen. That can even happen to someone like me does this every day.
Yeah, I mean, I would just get quotes, figure out exactly what it's going to cost and whether or not it makes sense for you to try to do it yourself. And if you think it doesn't, then obviously cash is very important, especially, I mean, it's always important for a business, but especially when you're starting up, and just weigh how much time you have to give to that and how much, again, risk you're willing to take.
How far did you go on your own? Because mine's a product and I want to start statewide, but I do want to go international, or, you know, I want to be on the distribution. So
We registered our trademark pretty much immediately.
did you do it state or federal?
We did a federal, and we just did it ourselves. When did we first start working with you?
You did your federal yourself, it was logo only.
Yeah,
Just
the actual logo itself. So then once we have acceptance before.
So here's some money saving advice for you. Register your name first, because the odds you're going to change your logo design in the first 5 or 10 years of your business are close to 100% in my experience.
Yep.
So logos, it's pretty easy to get a logo mark unless you just happen to step on somebody else, because they're all pretty, they can be pretty distinctive. But that also doesn't help you as much because you have to use that for decades or many, millions of CPMs to get it to connect. So yeah, you registered. I think you registered yourself. You didn't use me, and then we started talking about. I think you were starting to get on the e-commerce.
Yep.
E-commerce side. So we did more of an analysis. The other thing I would say is, and I'm just talking about trademark protection here, is don't engage a marketing firm or buy an expensive domain name until you've got those assets checked, at least preliminarily. At least find the obvious problems before going investing a ton of money into a design. Sorry.
It's okay.
You're welcome.
It's all good.
You're welcome. And here's why. Yes.
I found one other place, but it's La Loteria Paletas, and it's in Colorado. So that's what I'm really stressing out.
And what do they do?
They do the same thing I do. But so that's what I'm like.
There's a lot.
Should be something, yeah. Yeah, so here's a real life example. That's close enough to be infringement. Like you're gonna step on each other, right? And so all my beer clients, they all started here. all the local ones are here, and they're all in Colorado. You know, and I've got Colorado clients, I've got Arizona clients, I've got Tennessee clients, I've got, you know.
And I don't know if they're trademarked though, it's just the business, so it's the use.
They're probably not. Probably, odds are they're not, but they've got use. So this is a true story from the beer industry. Fate Brewing opened in Arizona. And then Fate Brewing, a month later, opened in Boulder. Fate Brewing Boulder filed a federal trademark a month after they were opened. So same example I gave earlier, right? So what does that mean? That means that Fate Brewing Arizona had use in Greater Phoenix Metro, and Fate Brewing Boulder had constructive use for the rest of the United States, right? And then Fate Brewing Arizona distributed into Tucson. Fate Brewing Boulder found out, sued them, 2-year lawsuit. I don't know how much they spent. They could have spent $200,000 or more each. Settled. Fate Arizona changed their name to McFate as part of the settlement. And last year, Fate Boulder went chapter 7, and now is owned by Scott Brewing, right? So easily $500,000 in legal fees went up in smoke over, and literally for a couple $1,000s up front, it could have been, it would have been settled early.
So my name should be, that's pretty much changed because of that.
I don't know.
I'm like, I'm stepping out. Sorry.
Remember that first slide? The one where it says that can't just talk for a few minutes. Yeah, well, I'll talk to you about it.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
Can you leave us cards?
Oh, sure.
Any more questions?
Please.
No, I think,
See, it's a Kentucky that has bourbon, and Jalisco that has tequila,
That's
and Champagne.
Champagne, yeah.
And Champagne.
Yeah, no, they did that exactly as we discussed, so to keep other people out of secret we call champagne.
now we have like.
They got that?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. I was gonna ask you, how quickly?
Oh, like,
Did
it's
they
still
say-
like 15 minutes. In like.
Is that was it?
Yeah.
Just
No,
fif-
these two.
Oh, until-
Like, yeah,
Well, it's also lasted longer,
yeah.
but did they all drop off like after 15 minutes started?
Oh, no, they
Almost
stayed on
as
the
short as
whole
it.
hour. Yeah,
That's okay.
yeah. They stayed on the whole hour.
It's hard to, how do you control it? Can they hear us?
Yeah.
Oh,
I will leave these here.
tell me.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, for those of you that are still online, thank you so much for joining us. Follow us on Facebook. Check out our website. We have a lot of exciting events coming up. One of the things, we did an analysis on businesses, and almost 70% of our businesses here in Taos are not using video in their websites or in their social media. And so we're gonna get a class on videography for businesses. And we're also gonna be doing a class on some financial accountability. And Agnes Chavez is gonna be giving a workshop. She's looking for adults, apprentice, to help with her apprenticeship with the Megaverse. But Brooks, I'm really honored that you came. You mean a lot to me, and you're an incredible leader in our community, and I have a lot of respect for you. And Seth, it's such a pleasure to meet you. You and I want to spend more time with you to understand everything you do, because I know you can be a real support. And Madeline, where's she at? Did she
She
leave?
had to sign off.
Oh, darn.
Who's this one?
This is Cecilia, thank you so much. And again, Megan has been with me for almost a year. We're, as a member of the Center on Rural Innovation, we were awarded a Americorps Vista. I wouldn't have been able to do anything without her support. And Cecilia, UNM Rainforest, we've been working together at bringing resources to Taos and in events. But it's a hybrid version. It's kind of nice, cozy group. But join us. I'm here for you also. I provide one-on-one coaching. We have a lot of mentors, like 11 mentors in different specialty areas to support our businesses. So stop by. I'm always here. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank